Good morning.
Morning, John.
All right. Today we will, time allowing, finish up the last couple plagues and kind of look at where things are at. All right. So I wanted to quick kind of reach back because the theme we've kind of had throughout this lesson, whether it's intended or not, the theme that I kind of picked out is Moses' learning journey, right? And I think it's important because we're coming to a real big inflection point as we get Pharaoh convinced the hard way and move to the next stage. So I wanted to kind of reflect a little bit back on all the things that have gone on from Exodus chapter 4 through 10. So go ahead and open your Bible to Exodus. We'll be there all day. Well, at least for my part of the day. So first, near the burning bush, and this is just intended as a real quick summary, a real quick reminder. And we talked about this because, remember, the whole theme has been God speaks to Moses, and Moses says, nope, I'm out, not me, someone else. And at the burning bush, I am the Lord. Well, what am I supposed to say your name is, right? Moses asking for his name, and he tells him and expands, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians. And of course, we'll read more about that today. And Moses' response is, well, they won't listen to me, right? And so God helps him out again. Well, I leave it out of here, and in a more full helping, I probably would have put, God addresses his concern, right? So what is your name? God answers him. They will not listen to me. God answers him and moves on. And in this case, we have the staff turning to the snake in his leprous hand and convincing him he can turn the Nile to blood. And what does Moses say? But I can't talk. Okay, yes, you can. I will be with you. Well, how about someone else, right? And we keep going through all of these things. And then Moses departs for Egypt. Everything seems to be okay. God gives him additional instructions and seeks to put him to death because it seems like, reading the text, he's only dipping a toe in, right? He's not fully taking on all of the things that God wants him to be and do regarding his son.
That's a lot more drastic than giving him leprosy.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot more drastic than leprosy, absolutely. And Zipporah helps him through that pickle. Moses goes before Pharaoh and makes the first request, remember, without miracles, just the ask. And of course, the Pharaoh declines, no straw, people grumble. And Moses says, oh Lord, why have you done evil to the people? And God speaks to Moses again, right? I will bring you into the land I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. But the people didn't listen to me. Right? So we're continuing through this cycle, right? And as much as God is teaching Pharaoh, he's also working Moses over pretty hard. And we kind of get these cycles repeating with Moses back and forth. And then finally, go to Pharaoh, right? So this is the starting of the cycle of the 10 plagues. And well, the people haven't listened. Why will Pharaoh? And once again, through each of these pieces, and I didn't include it here, just as the quick reminder summary, God comforts to some degree Moses, or reassures Moses, right? Answers each time. And so then we enter the cycle that we started last week, right? And the super quick review, remember the format that we had with the plague, the intensity, the gods of Egypt it affected, our general notes about it and the response. Here I've included just a few as a reminder, right? So as he's certainly teaching Pharaoh and the Egyptians through each of these encounters about who God is, right? God's teaching the Egyptians the hard way about who he is. There's also quite a bit of education here for Moses as well, right? Reminding Moses that he's in control, and even though you grew up with all the Egyptians, I've got control of things that these Egyptian pagan gods can't touch. So we're going to continue that today. All right. So now we are, we're in the last half or last third of chapter 10. And we're going to have plague number 9, darkness. All right. So like the other ones, we don't have too many verses in for this one. We'll have one at the end. So darkness is the plague. What about intensity? What about intensity? Right? I mean, the last few plagues killed things. What is going on here? Why would darkness come after hail and boils and locusts and all these other nasty things?
All they can do is sit there and think about what's been going on, because they can't move out of their house.
Yeah, absolutely. All I can do is it's ever present, right? I mean, I think that I wonder how long it hailed, right? It doesn't tell us, but it does tell us that darkness was there for, 3 days? 3 days? At the noonday sun, so 3 solid days of darkness, but only for the Egyptians, right? And the notes here suggest it's a token symbol of death, right? This darkness, this veil pulled over, right? Affects Ra, the sun god, and was most worshipped other than Pharaoh himself. And light, however, was in Goshen, home of the Jews. So for the Jews and where the Jews were at, everything was fine and dandy.
God kept the lights on.
He kept the lights on, right? He paid the electric bill. But not for the Egyptians, right? Be kind of hard for the Egyptians to do anything, right? I mean, it's not like they could put on their LED headlamp and go about their daily adventures, right? I'm certain that they had torches and other, lamp-like items, and they would be able to carry those around, right? But you have to remember, too, that, a lot of the work that would need to be done, even by the Egyptians, would need to be done in the light or with both hands. So you can think that, for 3 days, kind of everything likely would have ground to a pretty much halt. All right. And so after this one, what's the response? Pharaoh makes a concession, but refuses to yield. What's the concession for that Pharaoh gives? Yep. So now he's saying, take the kids, but leave the flocks, right? So Pharaoh is continuing this kind of negotiation tactic. And that's in verse 24. So he's continuing this negotiation. He's been trying to, after the first couple plagues, which he blew off, right? He's now been trying to negotiate with Moses about how he could let them go, but still retain a hold over the Egyptians. There he is. That's what he looks like. And that's the end of this portion. And Pharaoh said to him, "Get away from me, beware, do not see my face again, for in the day you see my face, you shall die." Right? So this is, Pharaoh has had enough of Moses and kicks him out. Right? And Moses said, "You are right, I shall never see your face again." So a pretty significant ratcheting up here, right? And I think this highlights again for the Egyptians, right? Or at least for Pharaoh, how significant this was. We think about hail, locusts, those other things, those destroy things that have already grown. Right? Not having the sun, ain't nothing going to grow without that, right? You won't even get there. So, which Egyptian god did plague number 10 affect? Right? Pharaoh himself. So we've gone all the way through, and now we're going to directly affect Pharaoh and his family. And we're going to start with the chart and go from there, right? Death of the firstborn. It is real death on every Egyptian firstborn person and animal. This affects everybody, right? Absolutely everybody is going to lose. We get the sense in previous really significant plagues, and we'll talk about this again in a little bit, right? That when Moses told Pharaoh, right, I'm going to kill the livestock that is not sheltered, it's kind of like, go get shelter. And we believe that some, I believe it, whether it notes or not, I think some of the Egyptians probably took stock of that, right? There was a way to avoid it. Not so here. Of course, a judgment on all the Egyptian gods and Pharaoh himself. And of course, this is cycling back, right? Moses got here in the first place because Pharaoh was trying to wipe out the firstborn. So this kind of comes all full cycle. And that was part of the Egyptians' attempt to keep control of the population of Egypt, or of the Israelites, right?
Hey, John,
Yeah.
since every firstborn of Egypt was supposed to die and Pharaoh did not die, does that mean that Pharaoh was not firstborn?
I would assume so, but I don't know.
Or maybe God just kept him alive to see all the trouble he caused?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think this plague, death of the firstborn, is the only one that has hit Pharaoh.
You think it's the only one that hit Pharaoh?
Locust has been a nuisance, the gnats have been a nuisance, the frogs, it's all been a nuisance. But he's in the palace, yes, he's covered in darkness as well, but he's removed from the everyday workings of what goes on in the Egyptian lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a nuisance for him.
This one's gonna hit him where it hurts.
Absolutely. And this has been a nuisance for him in a bunch of, the other plagues have been a nuisance in a lot of ways. One for the thing happening, and the second, and I forget which plague it mentions this, right? But the Egyptians themselves are starting to get really angry at Pharaoh, right? The Egyptians are wanting them to leave. And of course, we'll see that here in a minute as well. And of course, the response is Pharaoh, out of despair, releases all the Israelites. So we're going to read through several verses here in Exodus 11. So if you want to follow along, again, this is the American Standard version that was used in these slides. Now the Lord said to Moses, "One more plague will bring on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out from here completely. Speak now in the hearing of the people that each man ask from his neighbor and each woman from her neighbor for articles of silver and articles of gold." So what's going on here? What's going on here? Why is this happening this way? We haven't gotten to the 10th plague yet. We have not yet, right? So this is lead up, and the very first thing in lead up here is go ask have each man ask from his neighbor and each woman from her neighbor for articles of silver and articles of gold. Why is that first? Why is that here? He's preparing him for a journey. Absolutely. 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 Oh, preparing for the building of the tabernacle, right? So making sure that they have the resources to do that. Say again?
And the golden calf.
Well, and the golden calf, yeah, that's unfortunate, absolutely.
It could also show how ready the Egyptians are to get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah. The Egyptians didn't need this. The people didn't need this, right? They were ready. They'd already complained, right? They were motivated, right? This continues.
It's almost as if all along Pharaoh's reluctance, harsh treatment, what was happening was the people of God were almost like another kind of plague in Egypt, and they wanted rid of the plague.
Yeah, they were done, and I think we noted that they'd acknowledged already. Even Pharaoh's inner circle had acknowledged that this God has power, right? He is the one God, and I think this is we think about. So this is interesting, and I don't think I have the words on here quite that way. There's no negotiation with Pharaoh, right? This wasn't going to Pharaoh and saying, Pharaoh, you're going to make this right. What is that doing to Pharaoh?
Weakening.
Yeah. I mean, it would be one thing to wipe out Pharaoh, right? I mean, that would be like Werner was saying. That would be almost the easy way if Pharaoh was just gone. But the lesson here is more. The people of Egypt, it seems, have become so frustrated, right, that they're going to do what they can to get the Israelites out with or without Pharaoh.
Puts all accountability and responsibility on Pharaoh alone.
Right. So certainly they're going to destroy, or God's going to destroy Pharaoh. We're getting some feedback. Yeah, go ahead. Werner, got something?
John,
Yeah.
is it implied here that they had favor in the side of the Egyptians? So were these neighbors from whom they collected the silver and gold Egyptians? And if the Egyptians were living among them, how could it seem strange that if you have an Egyptian as your neighbor, that you would have light, they would have darkness, they would have hail, you wouldn't have hail? If they were in, I thought the Hebrews lived by themselves in Goshen.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if, so we have a very specific definition of the word neighbor. It means the people in my cul-de-sac. But I think, as we've seen, the definition for neighbor is a little bit broader. And we get, the text comes back later and tells us that they plundered the Egyptians. This ask of silver and gold is from the Egyptians.
It's ironic that this gold will be used to build the golden calf.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So I think that there's a couple things, right? So they're going to destroy Pharaoh emotionally, right? They're going to take his son. But the other piece is Pharaoh politically and spiritually is getting destroyed just as well, right? The people are going to revolt, right? And we know, right? Sorry, Alex, I'm jumping on your stuff here in the near future. Pharaoh's going to go, or I don't know if it's going to be your stuff or my stuff, but Pharaoh's going to go chase him out in the desert, and that's going to end poorly, right? And not just for Pharaoh, but everybody that goes with him. So this is a really significant dent, if you will, in the entire Egyptian culture, right? And everything that they've built on. And so, continuing off to what Werner said, right? The Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Furthermore, the man Moses himself was greatly esteemed in the land of Egypt, both in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. All right. So, I'm going to skip that. Esteemed in the land. How do we get here? This is why we covered the back and forth at the beginning. How in the world did we get here? Tell me about what you think is going on in Moses' head. Because we had talked about last week with all of these plagues, right? It wasn't like God said, hey, Moses, I got 10 plagues for you, right? He gave the first plague, and the people hated him, right? And all of these other plagues, and slowly they've become more intense and separated Egypt from Israel, right?
Pharaoh's servants, the administrators, they see Moses in a different light. They esteemed him in the land. But to Pharaoh, Moses caused Pharaoh to be steamed.
Yeah, we'll get there in a moment for sure. What else?
I think it's also that the Egyptians are seeing Moses is the stand-in, but the power comes from beyond Moses.
Absolutely.
They're beginning to recognize that Moses is the man,
Yep,
but this power has been vested to him.
absolutely. Absolutely. What else? How have the 10 plagues shaped Moses?
I think he's gaining a little more confidence because God says he's going to do something and it happens. So not necessarily confidence in himself, but in God.
He's gaining confidence in himself and confidence in God? Absolutely. We see that more and more as we're going to roll through the next few chapters of Exodus, right? And seeing this response and activity, right, is really important. What else? Who else is being affected by this? We have the Egyptians, we have Moses, when we have the Israelites. What do you think they're thinking? Where have they come from?
They were angry with him in the beginning because their workload was doubled or tripled.
Yeah,
And maybe through the course of this, I don't think their workload has changed any, but I think they feel like there's some sort of purpose for it at this stage.
yeah, absolutely. I kind of imagine that the Egyptians are a little bit busy with all this other stuff to worry about, getting the straw, getting the bricks made. I would imagine it's possible that the Israelites have been somewhat ignored a little bit, or at the very least, as we see through this series, certainly if I were an Egyptian, I'd probably leave them Israelites alone. Right, maybe, of course, not written down, but this is all, right, I think when I read through this, or when we read through this, it's really easy to just circle these things and be like, God got Israel out of Egypt. Done. No, right? He destroyed Pharaoh and Egypt, and he built Israel, right? And it's not just the Passover, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but it's this whole series of things which has built Moses to be an effective leader of the people. Not perfect, we got 40 years of bumps to go, right? But he built Moses to be an effective leader and built the people to trust in Moses and to trust in God. Because I kind of think the people, they were groaning and wailing, that's not the word I'm looking for, right? But they were groaning and weeping and reaching out to the Lord. That's what got Moses there in the first place. But it had been a long time for them to be in Egypt, generations and generations.
We're hearing more and more Moses and less of Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. We're hearing more from Moses, less from Aaron. He confounded magicians, right? He had them tied into knots. He'd helped the Egyptians save the cattle and the slaves back in chapter 9, right? Let them know it's coming. And he's forced the Egyptians to acknowledge that God has the power to destroy or save Egypt, as acknowledged by the Egyptians. That's not Moses or God talking, that's the Egyptians talking there in chapter 10. Yep, gotta fix that, Kevin. Add it to our punch list, right? All right, so let's keep rolling. Moses said, "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I am going out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, all the firstborn of the cattle as well." So, Werner, to your earlier question, the way that that's worded, it might just narrowly avoid Pharaoh, as you mentioned, to set him aside for further adventures. Moreover, there shall be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been before, and such as shall never be again. But against any of the sons of Israel a dog will not even bark, whether against man or beast, that you may understand how the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these your servants will come down to me and bow themselves before me, saying, "Go out, you and all the people who follow you, and after that I will go out." And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. Hot anger. So, this is interesting, right? Because there's a little bit of a time gap in here, or a little bit of a jump ski that's a little bit tough to follow. And I didn't do a whole lot of looking into it, so that's homework assigned to the reader. How did we get from Moses being kicked out from Pharaoh to telling the people to go get the silver and gold to went out from Pharaoh in hot anger? I kind of imagine that he wasn't talking necessarily to Pharaoh himself, but this really isn't even a discussion between him and Pharaoh, right? So I kind of get the impression that Moses was relaying these things to Pharaoh third hand, and this comes up. So, but it does. Why? Well, we'll get to here in a minute. I think we've covered a bunch of these things, so I'm going to skip them. Right? What's God trying to accomplish with Plague 10? Teach Pharaoh that God of the Jews is superior and powerful. Teach Pharaoh that the Jews are favored by God, despite them having nothing. Nothing. Right? You think about kind of the Egyptians' view of power and wealth and how those two are combined. The Israelites have nothing, yet their God has great power. Force Egypt to free Israel, of course. So why is Moses' anger so hot? Why is he hot with Pharaoh? I mean, at this point, could have just written him off. Sayonara. Why is Moses' anger hot?
Maybe he's just angry at Pharaoh because he wasn't listening, and it came to this extreme measure for him to listen, and so Moses was just, hot that it took that long for Pharaoh to get the understanding.
I think so. I think there's more to it. Who can add to that? Absolutely. Who can add to that? Yeah.
In the chapter, a few verses right before this, in chapter 10, he said he was going to kill Moses if he saw him. And I think 11 is just a continuation of that. He's replying in anger to Pharaoh.
Yeah. It's gotten extraordinarily personal between Pharaoh and Moses, And remember, what's their relationship? What's the title of the movie? Right? Prince of Egypt. Moses. Yeah, Warner.
I hadn't heard the responses, but I think Moses realizes that a lot of innocent people, Egyptians, never mind that, they're Egyptian, but a lot of innocent people are going to be killed because of this. And he realizes most Egyptians are not with Pharaoh and want the people to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think so. And I think the other piece that occurs to me as we read through this, right, is Moses being a prince of Egypt wasn't just important to Pharaoh, right? These are Moses's people too. Look at what this stubborn dolt is doing. Egypt saved the Israelites, right? They came down because of the famine, right? And okay, so not Egypt themselves, right? We could go back and reach into that, right? But God used Egypt to save Israel. And now Pharaoh, because he's a stubborn, is going to, good, we'll use that, is going to wipe them out. Right? It didn't have to be this way. All right. We're never going to get there. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders will be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, yet the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go out of his land. Right, so we have that last little piece, right, that's, to me, is kind of the summary, right? That's plagues 1 through 9 in a nutshell. Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders will be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders, yet the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go out of his land. Oof.
Just saying that the lesson you learn the hardest is the one you learn the best.
The lesson you learn the hardest is the one you learn the best. Yeah, he never learns it, unfortunately. He does not. He doesn't get enough time. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you. Why did we start a calendar here? What in the world is this doing? Yeah, it's marking
Later
the
on,
place.
it would,
Werner.
later on, it would be important. They will now, as part of the 10 Commandments, be keeping the Sabbath day holy, which is the seventh day, and you need a calendar to determine the seventh day. Now, at the beginning, the seventh day was the seventh day from creation, but now you need to determine the seventh day. So you need a calendar to do that.
I think, well, so Werner, I defer. You would know better than I would, but I would imagine that they had a calendar already, and they reset it to 1. But I'm not sure about that. So that was the impression that I was
Did they
getting
have a
from my
lunar?
reading.
Did they have the lunar calendar that they would use, where the first day of the month is the new moon? They had the new moon celebrations.
Right. So we'll come to this a little bit. But I think it's interesting, right? Because again, God only gave us so many words, and he decided it was worth the effort to start a calendar here, right? So whenever I see these little hiccups, I want to spend a few minutes thinking about them. Yeah.
I think he started it because he wanted them to always remember what he did. This was the most important event in the life of Israel ever. And throughout the Old Testament, we see it reviewed and reminded and told over and over and over again. And as long as the people remember that, and
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think that this is, I like the way that one commentator put it, this is the rebirth of a nation, right? It's the new beginning, because the Jews were toast in Egypt. This wasn't like anything else that had happened to them in the Bible for a number of reasons, right? That the Egyptians used them as cheap labor. That wasn't going to end. The Egyptians feared their number, so they were always going to be punished, right? But the other piece is that there was no assimilation. And we see that in other occupations and other places where the Israelites are sent away, as that there's this gradual commingling, right? And God tells the Israelites not to do it, but that assimilation still happened and gave them hope for future. There was none here. The Egyptians were not doing that. The Egyptians, that was, the Jews, the Israelites were an affront to the Egyptians. And so we've kind of, and I think that's part of the Israelites, reaching back out, is that they were at a dead end. It was over for them. There was no future. And so this is,
The calendar also be a way for God to start counting time before Jesus comes?
so I think I would need to think about that some more. I think the key here, and it sets us up, right? We always talk about the Passover as being that reminder of he put it on the calendar in a big way, right? It's a societal anchor to that event, a reminder, a memorial. The calendar itself becomes that reminder, not too different from what others do, right? Our calendar, to a large degree, has been set on the life of Christ. So is the Islamic calendar, right? So this is something that we have taken and repurposed or done again with the life of Christ, and Islam did as well. But here's what that calendar looks like. And not to get too I don't want to spend too much time here. One, because I don't have time. So if you're interested, you can take a peek at this. Go back to YouTube and fast forward till you get here. But here's what the calendar looks like. And so there's two kind of sequencing of the months. There's the sequence of the months on the very far left, which is the sacred sequence. That's the one that starts with Passover and rolls on through. But you notice that Passover in March, April is really at the end of the agricultural cycle, right? Or, I mean, once you kind of get to the spring, it's all over but the harvest, right? And certainly the harvest is significant, but from a calendar perspective, from an agricultural calendar perspective, they would start that later in the year, in September, October, at the completion of the harvest and the restart of all of the fields, the sowing of the wheat and the barley, or the plowing in September, October, and prep for the sowing of the wheat and the barley. So the months, the indication that I got is that the months stayed the same, but they renumbered them so that Passover was the first month. We're going to use this as one, tied to the lunar calendar. And then for me, because I'm a geek, they had a second Adar. They knew that they needed to sync every 3 years. They needed to add another month to match the solar calendar to the lunar calendar. So, go physics. Exodus 12:3. So after we get the calendar set up, speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of the month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their fathers' households, a lamb for each household. We're going to skip through some of this. We're a little bit short on time. And so rather than reading it through, because I think the intent was to read all the way through verse 13, we get the rules for how you will be observing the Passover, right? So this is how we get it together, how to divide the lamb with small families, unblemished male, a year old, from the sheep or the goats. So keep it until the 14th day of the same month. So they identified it on the 10th day of the month, right? And keep it until the 14th day of the month. That gave them 4 days to make sure it was good, right? So this wasn't like, just in my brain, right? Because I've watched the movie too many times. It's like, God says he's coming tonight. No. He gave them time. On the 10th, you're going to set aside. And on the 14th, it's going to happen. So they had days, if not a week or two, right, to figure this out. And there wasn't any tight tie that says that when they set the calendar to be the first month, that was actually day 1 as well. It could have been day 5, 6, 7, I don't know. But the distinct piece here is that notice was given, and it was days in advance. Now, then they we go through, put the blood on the doorpost and on the lintel, eat the flesh roasted with fire, unleavened bread, don't eat it raw, whole thing together. You shall not leave any of it to the morning. You shall eat in this manner, right, ready to go, with haste, right? And that is when he is going to send, see, it doesn't say it there, it says it later. He will execute his judgments, right? The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Let's see, what do I want to get to? All right. So I'm going to skip this next little piece, I think. Oh, okay. Then we come through a couple sections, one for the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, so we spend a little bit of time expanding about what that feast needs to look like, and setting up things for the future, right? So this is saying, hey, in the future, you're going to do things like this, and here are all the pieces associated with that. These things were not done, not all of them were done for the first Passover, but this was setting up the future memorial, and then they did it, right? The elders first did all of the things that were asked of them, and then the rest, and that included asking for the silver and gold. Once again, asking and receiving silver and gold before the plague. I am so out of time. But we're going to go ahead and finish out. And so it happened, and we're not going to read through this. I think we've all read this a number of times. See, there it was. It's just not fun. He called from the Pharaoh called from Moses and Aaron at night and said, "Rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go worship the Lord as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go. And bless me also." All right, so the Egyptians urged the people to send them out, for they said, "We will all be dead." Right? So even the people were pushing them out, and they took their dough before it was leavened. The sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested for the Egyptians articles of silver and gold, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. The Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. The Egyptians weren't mad at the Israelites. Well, I don't think they were happy, right? But the Israelites had favor in the sight of the Egyptians. That, to me, is the nail in the sarcophagus.
This is the end
Right?
of the sojourn.
Yeah. And thus, they plundered the Egyptians. They were done negotiating. So we're going to end with, why do you think Pharaoh asked for them to bless him?
He'd been through the worst, and he wanted the blessing of Moses' God, because he knew now that he was real. And to bless him, things would turn out better.
Now, is this before he loses his firstborn?
No, so this is after, right? So this is after the wailing and the crying.
Is this him asking for mercy?
I don't know. Is it asking for a mercy? I don't know. I get in reading through it, the only thing that seemed to make sense to me, and from different commentaries, is that Pharaoh continues to negotiate. right? Fine, I'll let you go if I get something nice in return. And he's down to asking for,
You be nice, I would.
right? And to that end, right, I think this is, would be important. You know, we know that Pharaoh goes rogue yet again, but this is important, I think, for all of the people around Pharaoh to see, because they would have seen it, because that's the way that Pharaoh operated. They would have seen Pharaoh ask for God's blessing, which would be admitting that Pharaoh ain't it.
He's bankrupt.
Yep. He knows that he is ultimately powerless. There you have it. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your comments. You have one more week, I think, of suffering through me. And then Alex will take over for a bit. I really, really appreciate your thoughts and comments.